I had been carrying the ring box in my coat pocket for 3 weeks straight, waiting for the right moment. Not an engagement ring, we had been married for 7 years, but an anniversary band, white gold with a thin row of sapphires, his birthstone. I had saved for it quietly over 6 months, tucking away freelance payments from my graphic design work into a separate account he didn't know about. Every time I touched the velvet case through the fabric of my jacket, I felt that warm flutter of anticipation, the kind you get when you know you're about to make someone you love genuinely happy. My husband, Ryan, had been talking about the firm's annual gala for weeks. Colton and Associates was one of the most respected architectural firms in Seattle, and this year's event was being held at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel downtown, a black tie celebration marking the firm's 30th anniversary. Ryan had made partner 2 years ago, the youngest in the firm's history, and I had watched him pour everything into that achievement. Late nights, endless drafts, weekends spent hunched over blueprints while I brought him coffee and rubbed the tension from his shoulders. I was proud of him, painfully, deeply proud. But here's the thing he didn't know. I had called his assistant, Dana, 2 weeks earlier and asked if I could arrange a small surprise during the gala. I wanted to present the ring during the cocktail hour, maybe pull him aside near the bar, hand him the box, and watch his face when he realized what I had done. Dana had been thrilled. She helped me coordinate with the event staff, arranged a small reserved table near the garden terrace, even suggested the best moment to approach him between speeches. Everything was set. The only problem was that Ryan had told me not to come. He said it casually, almost as an afterthought, 3 days before the event. It's going to be incredibly boring, Nora. Just partners talking shop, clients schmoozing, the usual. You'd hate it. I had laughed and told him I didn't mind, that I actually enjoyed getting dressed up once in a while. But he shook his head. Honestly, it's better if you sit this one out. I'll be networking the entire time. I won't even be able to talk to you. That stung a little, but I didn't push it. Ryan had been under a lot of pressure lately. The firm was competing for a massive waterfront development contract, something that could redefine Seattle's skyline, and he had been leading the pitch. He was stressed, distracted, shorter with me than usual. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once the contract was settled, he would come back to me the way he used to, warm, attentive, the man who used to leave sticky notes on my coffee mug every morning. So, I decided to surprise him anyway, not as a guest, because I didn't want to embarrass him or make things awkward with his colleagues. Instead, I called the catering company handling the gala and asked if they needed extra hands for the evening. They did. I filled out a quick volunteer form, picked up a black service uniform the day before, and just like that, I had my way in. I would blend in with the waitstaff, find the right moment, slip him the ring box, and disappear back into the crowd before anyone even noticed. It was supposed to be romantic. Spontaneous. The kind of story we would tell at dinner parties for years. I arrived at the Fairmont Olympic an hour before the event started. The hotel lobby glowed with amber light, the marble floors reflecting the massive floral arrangements that lined the entrance. Staff moved in efficient streams through the service corridors, carrying trays of champagne flutes, adjusting tablecloths, testing microphone levels. I followed them through a side door, adjusted my apron, pulled my hair into a tight ponytail, and grabbed a tray of sparkling water from the kitchen prep station. My hands were shaking slightly, but I steadied them. This was going to be perfect. The grand ballroom was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, the Space Needle glittering faintly through a thin layer of evening clouds. Round tables draped in navy linen filled the room, each centered with a low arrangement of white hydrangeas and flickering candles. A jazz quartet played softly from the far corner, their music weaving through the hum of arriving guests. I scanned the room for Ryan, my heart beating with that giddy nervousness I hadn't felt since our first date. I spotted him near the center of the room, standing with a group of senior partners. He looked incredible, charcoal suit, slim fit, no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone in that effortlessly confident way he had perfected over the years. He was laughing at something one of them said, his hand wrapped around a glass of bourbon, his posture relaxed and commanding at the same time. I smiled behind my tray. That was my husband. That was the man I was about to surprise with something beautiful. But then I noticed his eyes. They weren't focused on the conversation. Every few seconds, his gaze drifted toward the ballroom entrance, quick and sharp, the way you look when you're expecting someone specific. He checked his phone, adjusted his cuffs, shifted his weight. And every time the double doors opened to admit a new guest, his entire body tensed for a fraction of a second before settling back into a careful performance of ease. I told myself it was nerves about the contract pitch. I told myself he was waiting for an important client. I told myself a dozen things that made sense because the alternative didn't. Then she walked in. The sound in the room didn't actually change, but it felt like it did. She came through the entrance alone, wearing a deep emerald dress that caught the candlelight like something out of a magazine editorial. She was maybe 24, 25 at most, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders in loose waves and the kind of effortless beauty that made people pause mid-sentence to look. She moved through the crowd with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent her entire life being welcomed into rooms like this, someone who belonged without having to prove it. Ryan's reaction was immediate. He set his bourbon down on the nearest table without looking, nearly missing the edge. He excused himself from the partners with a quick nod and crossed the room toward her with a pace that was just fast enough to betray something he clearly didn't want anyone to notice. When he reached her, he placed his hand on the small of her back, not a polite business greeting, not a professional hello, the kind of touch that comes from practice, from familiarity, from comfort. She looked up at him and smiled, warm and private, the corners of her mouth curving in a way that suggested a shared language no one else in the room could speak. He leaned down and said something close to her ear. She laughed softly and touched his forearm, her fingers lingering there a beat too long. My tray wobbled. I caught it just before a glass tipped over, pressing my palm flat against the cold metal to steady myself. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a belt around my ribs and pulled. I was reading too much into it. I had to be. Ryan was friendly with everyone. He was a partner, he was networking. This was nothing. I moved closer, weaving between tables with the mechanical ease of someone carrying a tray, invisible in my black uniform. As I approached their side of the room, fragments of conversation from nearby tables reached me like static, slowly tuning into a clear signal. They've been inseparable for months, a woman in a silver dress murmured to her companion. Everyone in the office knows. Her father is Garrett Whitmore, the other replied. The developer. If Ryan locks that down, the waterfront project is basically guaranteed. Smart move. She's gorgeous, the family's loaded, and his wife as well. You know. I didn't hear the rest because the blood rushing in my ears drowned out everything else. My fingers went cold around the tray handles. I stood perfectly still in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by 200 people, and felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I forced myself to move. One step, then another. I circulated through the crowd, refilling water glasses with hands that trembled so badly I had to grip the pitcher with both hands. I kept my head down, kept my breathing controlled, kept telling myself that I had misheard, that the women were gossiping about someone else, that there was an explanation for everything I had just seen. But my body already knew what my mind refused to accept. I angled myself toward the terrace doors where Ryan and the woman had drifted, standing just inside the threshold of the garden area, partially hidden by a tall floral arrangement. The terrace was quieter, lit by string lights that cast soft patterns across the stone floor. Their voices carried clearly in the cool evening air. My father wants to meet with you again before the board vote, she was saying, her tone light but deliberate. He likes you, Ryan. He really does. But he needs to know you're serious about moving forward. About everything. I am serious, Ryan replied, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard in years, earnest, almost tender, as if he were offering her something fragile and precious. The papers are already with my attorney, it's just a matter of timing. I don't want to rush it and have it get messy. I know, she said. But my parents are practical people. They won't formalize anything with the firm until your personal situation is resolved. They can't risk the optics. I understand. And I've already told Nora that we need to have a conversation after the holidays. I'm going to handle it gently, but it's happening. By spring, I'll be free. Free. The word landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. I felt the ripple spread outward through my entire body, slow and devastating. My knees softened. I pressed my shoulder against the wall to keep from swaying. By spring, I'll be free. He wasn't talking about stress, he wasn't talking about the contract, he was talking about me. About ending me. About shedding 7 years of marriage like an old coat that no longer fit the image he was trying to build. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been 30 seconds, it could have been 5 minutes. The jazz quartet shifted to a slower number, the melody drifting across the ballroom like a lullaby for a world I no longer recognized. Through the glass terrace doors, I watched Ryan lift her hand and press his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so intimate, so rehearsed, that I understood instantly this was not new. This had been happening for a long time. Months. Maybe longer. While I was saving for his ring, while I was rubbing his shoulders, while I was waiting patiently for the pressure to ease and my husband to come back to me. He was never coming back. A colleague of his appeared on the terrace, champagne in hand, and clapped Ryan on the shoulder. "There's the power couple," he announced loudly. "Ryan Beckett and Megan Whitmore. I'm calling it now, you two are going to run this city." Ryan didn't correct him. He didn't flinch. He didn't say I'm married. He pulled Megan closer with a casual arm around her waist and grinned like a man who had already decided which life he wanted, and it wasn't the one that included me. I backed away from the terrace slowly, slipping through the service door into the staff corridor. The moment the door shut behind me, the noise of the ballroom vanished. The hallway was narrow, fluorescent, lined with catering carts and folded chair racks. It smelled like industrial cleaner and cold metal. I set the tray down on a cart and pressed both palms flat against the wall. My breath came in short, shallow bursts, and I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself not to fall apart. Not here, not now. The ring box was still in my coat pocket, hanging in the staff room down the hall. I could feel its absence like a phantom weight, the ghost of a surprise that would never be delivered, a celebration that had rotted before it ever began. I wanted to walk back in there. I wanted to stand in front of him with 200 witnesses and ask him to say it to my face. Tell me you're leaving me. Tell me she's worth more than 7 years. Tell me I was just a placeholder until something better came along. But I didn't. Because even through the shock and the pain and the nauseating vertigo of discovering your entire marriage is a lie, I understood something with brutal clarity. Confronting him now would give him the chance to spin it. He was an architect. He built things. He shaped narratives the same way he shaped buildings, with careful angles and controlled perspectives. If I confronted him publicly, I would become the hysterical wife who made a scene. The unstable one. The reason the marriage failed. No. I wasn't going to give him that. I stood in the corridor until my breathing steadied. Then I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, straightened my uniform, and walked out through the service exit into the cold Seattle night. The rain had started, light and persistent, the kind of rain that soaks through everything without you noticing until you're drenched. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive. The ring box sat on the passenger seat, its velvet surface catching the glow of passing headlights. I picked it up once, turned it over in my hands, then placed it in the glove compartment and closed it. Gently. The way you close a door you know you're never opening again. When I got home, the apartment was dark and quiet. Ryan wouldn't be back for hours. I stood in the hallway, coat still dripping, and let the silence settle around me. Then, very slowly, very deliberately, I walked into his office. Ryan kept his professional files meticulously organized color-coded folders in a mahogany shelf unit, his laptop docked on the desk, a locked filing cabinet beneath the window. For years, I had respected this space as his. I never opened his drawers. I never looked through his files. I trusted him completely, the way you trust the floor beneath your feet to hold you up. That trust was gone now. And what replaced it was something colder, sharper, infinitely more useful purpose. I started with the unlocked folders on the shelf. The first dozen were standard project timelines, structural assessments, city permit applications. But in a folder labeled Whitmore Consulting Phase 2, I found a set of documents that made me stop breathing. They were financial records. Not for the firm. For a separate LLC that Ryan had registered 8 months ago under a slightly different name, Beckett Architectural Solutions. The paperwork showed a series of transfers from Colton and Associates client escrow accounts into this private entity. The amounts weren't enormous individually, but collectively they added up to just over $400,000 siphoned from firm funds over the better part of a year. Beneath those records, I found invoices from a consulting company I had never heard of. Meridian Strategies Group billed for services described vaguely as project alignment and stakeholder engagement. I googled the company on my phone. No website, no public records. The registered address was a UPS mailbox in Tacoma. My hands were steady as I kept digging. In the locked filing cabinet, the key was in his desk drawer, hidden inside a box of paperclips. I found a leather folder containing handwritten notes in Ryan's cramped script. They detailed a plan to establish a private firm using the Whitmore family's funding, launch it with the waterfront development contract he was supposedly winning for Colton and Associates, and then transition the project entirely to his own company once the partnership with Garrett Whitmore was formalized. He was planning to steal the firm's biggest project from the inside. The notes also referenced what he called the transition timeline. Phase 1 secure Whitmore relationship, complete. Phase 2 formalize separation from N, in progress. Phase 3 resign from Colton, launch Beckett Architectural with Whitmore Capital. Phase 4 announce publicly with M. N. That was me. Nora. Reduced to an initial in a timeline. A checkbox between stealing from his firm and starting a new life with someone else. I photographed everything. Every page, every invoice, every handwritten note. I was calm in a way that surprised me, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had just discovered that the building she lived in had been condemned and was now gathering what she needed before the walls came down. When I finished, I returned every folder to its exact position, locked the cabinet, replaced the key, and turned off the desk lamp. Then I stood in the dark office for a long time, listening to the rain against the window, feeling the shape of my new reality settle into my bones. Ryan came home at midnight, smelling faintly of bourbon and unfamiliar perfume. He kissed my forehead the way he always did, brief, automatic, the muscle memory of a man performing a habit he no longer felt. Good event, he murmured. Boring, like I said, you didn't miss anything. I smiled at him in the dark bedroom. Glad it went well, I said. My voice was perfectly even. He fell asleep within minutes. I lay beside him with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, feeling the distance between our bodies like a physical wall. The man sleeping next to me was a stranger. He had been a stranger for months, maybe longer, and I had simply refused to see it because the truth was too enormous to hold. But I was holding it now. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I gave myself 4 days. 4 days to research, plan, and position every piece before making a single move. I didn't cry during those 4 days. I didn't confront Ryan. I didn't change my behavior in any detectable way. I made his coffee in the morning. I asked about his day. I kissed him goodbye when he left for work. And behind each gesture, behind each careful smile, I was building something he would never see coming. On Monday morning, I drove to the offices of Garrett Whitmore's development company in Bellevue. The building was glass and steel, aggressive in its modernity, the kind of structure designed to communicate that the people inside it were not to be wasted. I wore a navy blazer, pressed slacks, and carried a slim portfolio. I had called ahead using a freelance alias I kept for design contracts, Nora Ellis, and requested a brief meeting regarding concerns about a business partnership Mr. Whitmore was considering. The receptionist hesitated, but something in my tone, polite, measured, deliberately urgent, made her pick up the phone. 12 minutes later, I was sitting across from Garrett Whitmore, himself in a corner office that smelled like leather and cedar. He was in his 60s, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, with the kind of calm authority that came from decades of building an empire brick by brick. He studied me with sharp gray eyes and said nothing for a long moment after I introduced myself. "You said this concerns a business partnership," he began. "I have several. Which one?" The one with Ryan Beckett, I said. My husband. The air in the room shifted. Garrett leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. Go on. I opened the portfolio and placed the documents on his desk, the LLC filings, the siphoned funds, the fake consulting invoices, the handwritten transition plan. I walked him through each piece without emotion, without editorializing, letting the evidence speak for itself. I explained the shell company in Tacoma, the funds diverted from Colton and Associates escrow accounts, and Ryan's plan to steal the waterfront project and launch it under his own firm using Whitmore Capital. Garrett examined each document with the slow precision of a man who had seen people try to deceive him before and had learned exactly how to read the signatures of dishonesty. When he reached Ryan's handwritten notes, the transition timeline with my initial reduced to a checkpoint, his jaw tightened visibly. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Claire, get me David Chen from legal, now. We waited in silence until a slim man in wire-rimmed glasses entered the room. Garrett handed him the documents without explanation. Verify everything. Cross-reference with our internal due diligence files. I want confirmation within the hour. David nodded and left. Garrett turned back to me. Mrs. Beckett, why are you bringing this to me instead of to the police? Because the police will take months, I said, and in that time, Ryan will find a way to hide what he's done. He's meticulous, he plans everything. But he didn't plan for me finding out, and he certainly didn't plan for me sitting in this office. What do you want? Garrett asked. I had practiced this answer in my bathroom mirror. I had rehearsed it driving across the bridge. I had whispered it to myself in parking lots and grocery store aisles until it no longer trembled when it left my mouth. I want 3 things, I said. First, I want Ryan to face real consequences not just for cheating, but for the fraud, the embezzlement, and the people he's deceived along the way. Second, I want your family protected from the fallout. If this becomes public without preparation, it will damage your reputation as much as his. And third, I want enough financial security to start over. Not your money. Not a payout. Just a clean separation from a man who was planning to leave me with nothing while he built his next life on stolen funds. Garrett studied me for what felt like a full minute, then he said, You're remarkably composed for someone in your position. I've had 4 days to fall apart in private, I replied. This is what's left. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, but recognition. The look of a man who understood strategic thinking and respected it even when it arrived from an unexpected direction. David Chen returned 40 minutes later, his face tight. It all checks out, he said. Every transfer, every invoice. He's been running this operation for at least 9 months. And there's more. 2 of the shell accounts are linked to a contractor who's currently under federal investigation for bid rigging on public infrastructure projects. Garrett closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, his voice was quiet and precise, and every discussion with Beckett. Immediately. Inform our legal team to prepare a full disclosure package for the relevant authorities, and get me Martin Hale. He looked at me. Martin is the best forensic accountant in the Pacific Northwest. If your husband has hidden anything else, Martin will find it. And my daughter? Garrett added, his voice dropping. Did she know? I don't believe so, I said. From what I've seen, Ryan was careful to keep Megan separate from the financial side. She likely believes he's exactly who he presents himself to be. Garrett exhaled through his nose. Then she'll need to hear it from me. Not from a headline. I nodded. I didn't envy him that conversation. Before I left, Garrett stood and extended his hand. Mrs. Beckett. I'm going to make sure this is handled correctly. And I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. You have my word. I shook his hand, gathered my portfolio, and walked out of the building into the Bellevue rain. My hands were shaking for the first time in 4 days. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Garrett Whitmore had the kind of connections that compress timelines, a phone call here, a referral there, and suddenly, the machinery of accountability was turning at a speed Ryan never would have anticipated. 8 days after my meeting with Garrett, Ryan walked into Colton and Associates on a Tuesday morning and found 2 IRS criminal investigation agents standing in the lobby. A forensic audit team from the State Attorney General's office was already inside the conference room, accompanied by representatives from the firm's managing partners, none of whom would meet Ryan's eyes. "Mr. Beckett," the lead agent said, "we have a warrant to examine all financial records associated with your professional accounts, personal holdings, and the entity registered as Beckett Architectural Solutions." Ryan's face went white. "I know this because Dana, his assistant, the same woman who had helped me plan the surprise that never happened, called me that afternoon, her voice shaking. Nora, something terrible is happening at the firm. Ryan's in trouble. Serious trouble." I thanked her quietly and hung up. Over the next 48 hours, Ryan's carefully constructed world disintegrated with the same methodical precision he had used to build it. Colton and Associates suspended him immediately. His operating accounts were frozen. Clients who had trusted the firm with multi-million-dollar projects demanded explanations, and when none came that satisfied them, they pulled their contracts. The waterfront development, the crown jewel Ryan had been willing to destroy his marriage and his ethics to secure, was formally awarded to a competing firm within the week. He tried to call Megan. She didn't answer. He drove to the Whitmore estate in Mercer Island. Security turned him away at the gate. He texted her 17 times in one night. I saw them later, during the discovery phase of our divorce, each message more desperate than the last. She responded once, a single line that must have cut him deeper than any indictment. "My father told me everything. Don't contact me again." Ryan came home that night and paced the apartment like a caged animal. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He stood at the living room window, staring at the city lights as if they might rearrange themselves into an answer. "Someone did this to me," he said, his voice raw. "Someone inside the firm. Someone who had access to my files, my accounts, everything." I was sitting on the couch, a book open in my lap that I hadn't read a single word of. "That sounds terrifying," I said evenly. "Do you know who?" He shook his head. "It has to be someone close. No one else could have known about the LLC. No one else could have connected those accounts." He looked at me then, really looked, and for one breathless moment, I thought he knew. But his eyes passed over me the way they had for months, without truly seeing, and he turned back to the window. "I'll figure it out," he muttered. "I always figure it out." But he didn't figure it out. Not that night, not the next morning when federal agents arrived at our apartment with an arrest warrant, not during the 3 months of legal proceedings that followed. The charges were severe wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Ryan's attorney negotiated aggressively, but the evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. In the end, Ryan accepted a plea deal. 32 months in federal prison. Full restitution to Colton and Associates. Permanent disbarment from practicing architecture in the state of Washington. I filed for divorce the same week the plea deal was finalized. My attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia, whom Garrett Whitmore had quietly recommended, handled everything with surgical efficiency. Given Ryan's criminal conviction, the proceedings moved quickly. I received the apartment, both vehicles, and a structured settlement from Ryan's remaining assets. Full custody was uncontested. Ryan didn't fight for anything. By that point, he had nothing left to fight with. On the day the divorce was finalized, I sat in my car outside the courthouse and opened the glove compartment. The ring box was still there, exactly where I had placed it the night of the gala. I opened it one last time, looked at the sapphires catching the gray Seattle light, and then closed it. I drove to a jeweler downtown and sold it. The money went into a savings account I opened that same afternoon, the first deposit in what I silently named my starting over fund. Ryan went to prison on a cold morning in February. I didn't go to the sentencing hearing. I didn't need to. Patricia called me afterward with the details: 32 months, minimum security facility in Oregon, eligible for early release in 22 months with good behavior. I thanked her, ended the call, and made myself a cup of tea. That evening, I sat in the quiet apartment, my apartment now, and wrote Ryan a letter. Not a long one, not an angry one. Just honest. Ryan. You spent 9 months planning a future that didn't include me. You reduced me to an initial on a timeline. You told another woman you'd be free by spring, as if our marriage was a sentence you were serving. I want you to know that the evidence that ended your career didn't come from a disgruntled employee or a rival firm, it came from me. Your wife. The woman you told to stay home because the gala would be boring. I was there that night, Ryan. I heard everything. And I want you to know one more thing. I was carrying your anniversary gift in my pocket when I watched you kiss another woman's hand and let a stranger call you a power couple. I hope the architecture of your new life has better foundations than the last one. Nora. I mailed it to the federal facility the next morning. I never received a response. Spring arrived slowly in Seattle, the way it always does, reluctant sunshine breaking through weeks of gray, cherry blossoms appearing overnight along the waterfront, the city gradually shaking off its winter weight. I started taking long walks along Alki Beach in the mornings, my jacket zipped against the lingering chill, watching the ferries cross the Sound. I reopened my freelance design business under my maiden name. The first few months were lean, but I had always been good at building things from nothing. A skill, I realized, that Ryan had never appreciated because he had always been too busy building things from deception. Clients came slowly, then steadily. A small branding project for a bookstore in Capitol Hill. A website redesign for a nonprofit in Fremont. A full visual identity package for a new restaurant in Ballard that got written up in a local food magazine, which led to 3 more referrals in the same week. By summer, I had enough work to justify renting a small studio space in Pioneer Square, a bright, narrow room with exposed brick walls and a window that overlooked a courtyard where someone had planted a row of sunflowers. I was arranging my desk on the first day in the new studio when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an old college friend, Adrian, whom I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Saw your new design work online. It's gorgeous. Coffee sometime? I miss you. We met at a cafe near Pike Place Market, and within 10 minutes of sitting down, I remembered why Adrian had been my closest friend in college. She was warm without being intrusive, funny without being cruel, and she had an almost supernatural ability to make you feel like the most interesting person in the room. I heard about Ryan, she said gently, halfway through her latte. I'm sorry, Nora. Don't be, I said. I'm not. Not anymore. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. Good. Because you look better than I've seen you look in years. Adrian became the first thread in a new social fabric I hadn't realized I needed. She introduced me to her circle: artists, writers, small business owners, people who built their lives around creativity and connection rather than ambition and status. Friday, dinners at someone's apartment. Saturday morning hikes in Discovery Park. Spontaneous art gallery visits on rainy Wednesday evenings. For the first time in years, I had friendships that existed entirely outside the gravitational pull of Ryan's career. One evening, in late August, Adrian dragged me to a gallery opening in Georgetown, where a mutual friend was showing a series of photographs of Pacific Northwest landscapes. The gallery was small and warm, packed with people holding plastic cups of wine, and I was studying a particularly beautiful shot of Mount Rainier at sunset when someone beside me said, "That one makes me homesick, and I've never even left." I turned. He was tall, dark-haired, with kind eyes and a crooked smile that suggested he didn't take himself too seriously. He was holding 2 cups of wine and extended one toward me. "You looked like you could use this." "I could," I admitted. "Thank you." His name was Eli. He was a high school English teacher in West Seattle, originally from Portland, and he had come to the gallery because his neighbor was the photographer. We talked for an hour without either of us noticing the time. He asked me about my design work and listened, actually listened, with the kind of focused attention I had forgotten existed. When I mentioned that I had recently started over after a difficult chapter, he didn't pry. He simply nodded and said, "Starting over is the bravest thing a person can do. Most people just stay." We exchanged numbers. He texted me the next morning, not a grand gesture, just a photo of the sunrise over Puget Sound with the caption, "Tuesday's not bad so far." I smiled at my phone for the first time in longer than I could remember. Eli didn't rush. He didn't push. He asked me to coffee, then to a bookstore, then to a hike along the trails at Rattlesnake Ridge, where we talked for 4 hours straight and forgot to eat lunch. He brought me a first edition copy of my favorite novel for my birthday, wrapped in brown paper with a handwritten note that said, "For the woman who's writing her own story now." He never asked about Ryan, he never competed with a ghost. He simply showed up, consistently and honestly, and let whatever was growing between us grow at its own pace. On a Saturday morning in October, nearly a year after the gala, I was sitting in my studio working on a logo design when my phone buzzed with a notification from Dana. She had forwarded me a news article, a short piece in the Seattle Times business section about the final dissolution of Colton and Associates' civil suit against Ryan, resulting in a full judgment in the firm's favor. Ryan was ordered to repay every cent he had siphoned, plus damages. The article noted that he remained incarcerated and was expected to serve the remainder of his sentence. I read the article once, closed the tab, and went back to my work. That evening, Eli came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat on the floor of my apartment, eating pad thai from paper containers, while rain streaked down the windows. He told me about a student in his AP literature class who had written a college essay so beautiful it made him cry at his desk during lunch period. I told him about a client who had cried when she saw the finished branding for her late mother's bakery, a business she was reopening in her honor. "You build things that matter," Eli said, looking at me with an expression I had spent 7 years hoping to see from someone and never had. "I'm learning to," I said. He reached across the paper containers and took my hand. Nothing dramatic, nothing rehearsed. Just his fingers wrapping gently around mine, warm and steady, and the quiet understanding that whatever this was, it was real. Outside, Seattle settled into its evening rhythm, ferries crossing the dark water, city lights reflected in the rain-slicked streets, the distant hum of a world that keeps turning whether you're ready or not. I squeezed his hand back. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because someone had built a place for me, because I had built it myself.